These are 10 cards you should never draft in Edge of Eternities. Putting them into your decks will actively make them worse, and there are far better options. First up is Temporal Intervention. For 2 and a black, you get a sorcery that says, this spell costs 2 less to cast if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped this turn. Target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, that player discards that card. Now for starters, if you ever have to spend 3 mana for this effect, you are very unhappy, because you spent 3 mana to trade 1 for 1 with your opponent's card, but they didn't have to spend any mana on that card because it was in their hand. And so you spent 3 mana, they spent 0 mana, and both players have lost 1 card. So that's really not a great outcome for you. If you spend 1 mana on this, it's a little bit better, but all of that is negated by the fact that once you get into a top deck battle with your opponent, then this card is a complete blank because both players are just playing all of the spells that they're drawing, and you're just going to be drawing a blank card, and that's going to lose you a lot of games because top deck battles do happen quite frequently in Limited. This is also the sort of thing where you're taking a random common or uncommon most of the time, and spending mana to do that is just not worth it. You'd rather just put creatures in your deck or removal spells in your deck or cards that affect the board state, because this is not going to be an effective Magic card. Next is Sinister Cryologist. For 2 and a blue, you get a 2/3 creature that says, when this creature enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-0 until end of turn, and then has Warp for a single blue mana. The fact that this effect only happens until end of turn just vastly reduces the utility of this card. It maybe enables attacks, but usually won't. And 3 mana 2/3s are just not a good place to be in modern era Limited. There are so many more powerful cards you can be playing for 3 mana, much better stat lines, much better effects. You can get tons of value with your 3 drops these days. So you don't want to be putting random 3 mana 2/3s into your deck that aren't going to have a meaningful effect on the game. So just have a higher standard when it comes to cards, and you're going to be able to do better, because when you have to put this card in your deck, you're going to feel really unhappy about it, and you should just avoid that scenario entirely by not drafting this card and trying to find other colors if it looks like Sinister Cryologist might be a card you're forced to play in your blue deck. Next is Ruinous Rampage. For 1 red, you get a sorcery that says choose 1. Ruinous Rampage deals 3 damage to each opponent. Exile all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. Now, dealing 3 damage to your opponent for 3 mana at instant speed is just a horrific card. You would never play that card in your deck. Exiling all artifacts with mana value 3 or less, in some situations, in some formats, you could imagine that being potentially useful, but this is not the format for that card. A lot of the artifacts that you care about dealing with are the spacecraft, which are going to be bigger artifacts that have much higher mana values than 3 in many cases. A lot of the times this thing is just going to nab 1 or 2 lander tokens, if that, and the fail case of dealing 3 damage to your opponent is really, really bad. So just avoid playing Ruinous Rampage. You're going to be happy that you did. Next is Scout for Survivors, another 3 mana sorcery. For 2 and a white, it says return up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. Now again, there are some formats where this card would be totally reasonable. Those formats would be ones where there are playable 1-drops that you're happy to put into your deck. Formats where there is much more self-mill. This is not a format where you're able to fill your graveyard super easily, or one where you're able to get 2-drop plus 1-drop combo back consistently, things like that. Again, the lack of really playable good 1-drops in pretty much every color makes Scout for Survivors so much worse. And overall, because of that, you'd rather just put a 3-drop in your deck that's always going to do what you want, because the best case scenario for this card usually is going to be 3 mana, get back a 3-drop and have a +1/+1 counter on it. But the fact that you can't play this until you get a 3-drop into your graveyard, and there's not really self-mill to facilitate that, means that you just would rather have a consistent 3-drop that is going to be doing this thing every single game, because in some situations you're going to have this in your opening hand, not be able to affect the board state on turn 3 and just fall way behind, whereas if you just had a normal 3-drop, you would be totally fine, and you would just rather have that in, because the downside of Scout Survivors is definitely not worth the upside in this format. So just avoid Scout for Survivors and you will be happy that you did. Next is Atomic Microsizer, a really confusing little card. It has so much different text, so many different utility things that you can potentially do with it, but all of it adds up to a card that's pretty inefficient and oftentimes a little bit too niche. So you should just avoid this card. Single blue mana for an equipment that says equipped creature gets +1/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. That creature can't be blocked this turn and has base power and toughness 1/1 until end of turn, and the equip cost is 2. So you have to spend 3 mana to get this onto your creature. It only gets +1/+0. You can give it unblockable, so to basically have a 2 a 2-powered unblockable creature with the Atomic Microsizer, or you can shrink down your opponent's creature. But overall, you generally don't have that many utility slots in a deck, and a lot of those utility slots in this format should be taken up with good spacecrafts, not with random equipments that are very kind of finicky and hard to use and really need certain scenarios to be powerful. So Atomic Microsizer, just kind of cutesy and a card you shouldn't be playing in your decks. Next is Graveblade Heavy. Now, 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 3/4 that says as long as you control an artifact, this creature gets +1/+0 and has Death Touch. 4 mana for a 3/4 these days is just horrific. So that's just such a bad low case that even though some of the time, or even a decent percentage of the time you put this card in your deck, it's going to be a 4/4 Death Touch, you just should have a higher standard. As we already discussed with the creatures, when you are playing creatures in Modern Era Limited, you can get such better deals for your cards. In this very same format at Common, there is a 4 mana 4/4 Trampler that has landfall to get +1/+0. That's just like at Common as well. These are options that you have available to you. There's other 4-drops like Cav Landseeker. It's a 4 mana 4/3 menace that comes into play with a temporary lander token. There's much more powerful cards you can be playing than Graveblade Heavy, and this 4-drop slot is a really important part of your curve, because if you play a Graveblade Heavy and then it dies to a 2 mana Depressurize or something like that, you're just going to lose the game on the spot. And the fact that you're not always going to have an artifact to even make this a 4 mana 4/4 Death Toucher, so that sometimes it won't even be able to trade with your opponent's 4 mana 4/4 Trampler or things like that, make Graveblade Heavy a real liability and a card you should avoid playing. Again, on this topic of trying to make sure that you play cards that are consistently good and worth the investment, Cloud Sculpt Technician, 2 and a blue for a 1/4 flyer. As long as you control an artifact, this creature gets +1/+0. Again, a 3 mana 1/4 flyer is just horrific for the Modern Era of Limited. It's just not a good stat line, and the fact that some percentage of the time you're going to have a 3 mana 1/4 makes this card really, really weak, especially because most decks have access to flyers in this format because of the spacecrafts. So it's not like you're going to be able to just end the game by hitting your opponent for 1 over and over and over with your Cloud Sculpt Technician. And even if it does become a 2/4, a 3 mana 2/4 flyer is like okay. If this was always a 3 mana 2/4 flyer, that'd be something that you could potentially consider playing a decent percentage of the time. But the fact that in some games things are going to go wrong, you aren't going to love your Cloud Sculpt Technician when it's a 1/4, and also the fact these are just better options. It's not that these cards, like if you just rewinded and put these cards into like Alpha or something like that, the first Magic set, these cards would look a lot better, but the card designs have gotten so much more powerful these days. These aren't cards you should be drafting, because you want to be drafting the more powerful cards in the packs, and if you're in the situation where you start having to take Cloud Sculpt Technicians for your deck, it probably means you're in the wrong colors. Next is Virulent Silencer. Again, just a classic example of a card that just isn't a good stat line, and there's not synergy to support it in this format. 3 mana 2/3, whenever a non-token artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. A 3 mana 2/3, as we already discussed, is not a card you want to be putting in your deck. There is not a poison theme. There's not a ton of artifact creatures even. I guess the spacecrafts do count. There are some artifact creatures here and there, but a lot of the creatures are not artifact creatures. Virulent Silencer is not going to be getting you poison wins, and so if you just imagine this card as a 3 mana 2/3 creature, you're not going to be that far off. And a 3 mana 2/3, as we already established, is not where you want to be. There's just so many better options. Just avoid taking this card, even though it's an uncommon. Just remember, this isn't a stat line you're happy to be playing. Next is Melt Strider's Gear. For a single green mana, you get an equipment that says when this equipment enters, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has reach, and then the equip cost is a whopping 5 mana. Now, this is basically playing out like an aura in many cases that you just put on your creature at sorcery speed, give it +2/+1, and then you can re-equip for the mighty cost of 5. As we already discussed, you want to be using your random slots, like your non-creature, non-removal, non-combat trick slots, for things like spacecrafts in this set, and not for equipments that play out like auras and are super expensive to equip. The removal spells in this set are super, super strong and super, super efficient. And so investing cards into making a super threat instead of just diversifying your threats and playing multiple creatures into play is going to lead to you getting blown out. Because you put Melt Strider's Gear onto your creature, your opponent kills that creature with an efficient removal spell. All of a sudden, you've just got a Melt Strider Gear that's going to take forever to get to re-equip to a creature. And by that point, your opponent's probably going to have taken over the game, or you'd rather be using your mana for other things. So Melt Strider's Gear, definitely a card you should be avoiding. The final card on this list is Thaumaton Torpedo. For a single mana, you get an artifact that says pay 6, tap it, sacrifice this artifact, destroy target non-land permanent. This ability costs 3 less to activate if you attacked with a spacecraft this turn. Now, that's only happening in the extreme late games in most cases. Getting spacecrafts operational does not happen super early, and as a result, you'd much rather just play other cards in your deck that are going to do their thing consistently, because you having to wait until the late game, until 6 mana to use your card to kill your opponent's threats, is not something you're going to be happy doing. It's going to lead to you trading off at a mana disadvantage. And in the games where you're able to attack with your spacecrafts, you're usually in fine shape anyway, and having a card that's better in those scenarios is going to be worse. If it just was a mana discount, if you had a spacecraft, that would be a different story, but it's going to cost you 6 mana so much of the time, especially in the games where you really need your removal spells to help you pull through, that Automaton Torpedo is a card that you should not be putting into your decks. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag 10traps in the comments section down below. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.